Okay, we are doing our project over ethnographic research. I'm Ellie Swim.
I'm Blake Oliver.
And I'm Sam Hunsel.
Okay, so what is it? Ethnography or ethnographic research is a qualitative research study looking at social interactions of users in a given environment. So because it's a qualitative study, it's collecting non-numerical data to understand concepts, opinions, and experiences through things like observation, video, audio, interviews type deal. So the main objective is to gain insights into how users interact with things in their natural environment. And the time spent on this type of research can be a couple of hours to several months. So it's very varying depending on what question you're trying to answer. So there are three types of ethnographic research. The first is realist. And the realist is typically the most popular approach, and it uses an objective account of the situation. It's typically written in third person point of view to, once again, objectively report on information learned from participants. And it adds no personal bias or no political bias. The next form of ethnographic research is a case study. This is typically a study of an individual, but can also be a study of a program, event, or an activity involving individuals. And this usually searches for shared patterns that develop amongst individuals. And the last one is a critical ethnography research. And this typically includes like a sort of advocacy perspective where the author of the study is interested in advocating for the emancipation of marginalized groups in society. They are typically, the researchers themselves are typically politically minded individuals that are seeking to advocate against inequality and oppression. And they usually speak on the audience, to the audience on the participants' behalf, giving them a sort of authority. And with them being politically minded, they do usually identify their biases. So some advantages of ethnographic study is that it has the ability to see users interact with technology in their natural environment, or just ability to see users interact in their natural environment. And with things like business ethnography, it allows you to see which products users are more likely to use before they are released and can help determine demand in the market, and can also identify unexpected issues that you as the researcher or the designer of a product may not have seen. And it also just provides like a comprehensive perspective and helps to reveal interrelationships among multifaceted dimensions of group interactions and provide context for behaviors. So some disadvantages of ethnographic studies is that they can take a long time to generate and analyze all findings. Short studies may not be as accurate as longer ones. Ethnographic studies cost more than usability studies, and researchers' presence can affect results because typically the person is aware of the researcher's presence. In addition to this, it's also somewhat difficult for researchers to eliminate their bias. And it's also difficult to actually check the validity of some of these studies and of the research conclusions. So there are three methodological principles of ethnographic research. They are naturalism, understanding, and induction. And naturalism is typically the aim of the research is to capture the objective nature of naturally occurring human interaction. So this is just concerned with how people behave in their genuine life experiences. The argument is that this can only be achieved through firsthand contact and not by what happens in experimental or artificial settings or what is said in interviews. And this requires a researcher to minimize their influence on the activities of the people being studied. So that's why things like observation, notes, videos are all important while recording data. So you aren't interfering with the tasks and behaviors, or the natural tasks and behaviors that individuals are participating in.
Okay, so the second the second principle of ethnographic research is understanding. this states that you can only explain human action if you can understand the culture where the action occurs. So there's a risk of misunderstanding when the researcher is also familiar with the settings. So a researcher could just have a misconception or make false assumptions thinking they know it. This third principle was induction. This argues that if the researcher starts new research with a predefined theoretical models, concepts, or propositions, then they may fail to discover the distinctive and contextual nature of the research. This is in favor of inductive and discovery-based research and focuses on local interpretation. So research starts as a general interest and is refined or changed as research proceeds. Theoretical ideas should be developed during the research. So don't have a theoretical idea as you go in. Methods for researching, we have two main methods: passive observation, contextual interviews, and then we'll talk a little bit about how research is recorded. So for methods, the first one was passive observation. This is also known as shadowing. This is where the user or users are shadowed by a researcher while they go about their daily tasks. Observations can be recorded in many different ways. This includes taking notes, photographs, sketches, and videos. Research may also be done as a team. Each member would be observing multiple users. This just benefits by getting research done more quickly. Our second method was contextual interviews. This is the method where the research will interact with the user a little bit more. The interviews will be in a natural environment, so it's not going to be too formal. The main difference from this method over the other is the researcher is asking the user questions to gain insight. Okay, so ways to record research would be field notes. This could be condensed, which would be like a short description made in the field during data collection. Expanded, this could be filling in details. This is usually done away from the field. Fieldwork journal, this is research recording reactions that they may have, impressions, assumptions, and problems during fieldwork. And then we also have analysis and interpretation. This is a progressive record of analytical and interpretive insights, concerns, and associations. Okay, and so we also have analysis of the research. Analysis will be dependent on which method was used for research. Both cases, research will be conducted to obtain an in-depth view of the user and how they go about completing daily tasks. The researcher will look for patterns, themes, changes, and barriers that the user may or may not encounter. And one method that is commonly used is an affinity diagram. So for an affinity diagram, it just organizes information, opinions, problems, and solutions and issues by placing them in related groups. This allows a broad range of ideas to be categorized so they can be more effectively analyzed.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take it away with an example. So you can see in this example, we've got different groups of Post-it notes or, sticky notes. And you can see that there are delays, organization, interruptions, and motivation, structural challenges. So what this researcher did was they wrote their notes and bullet points on these Post-its and stuck them all on a wall and then categorized them by motives and the organization and delays and like what was happening. And so the affinity diagram is basically just a good way to organize your thoughts and information to draw conclusions and themes from what you were observing in your research. It doesn't have to be like in this example with Post-it notes on a wall. It could be a table, online or something you write out, but just something that involves taking different pieces and putting them in different groups to better organize your own thoughts. And so the next we'll kind of look at roles of the researcher. There are three. The first one is a complete participant, which is exactly as it sounds. You are completely participating in the research. The people that you are researching do not know that you are there as a researcher. So it's kind of like an undercover boss situation where they don't know who you are, but you are observing them and taking note of what they're doing. This is beneficial if you're really high profile researcher and you're looking at a delicate issue like illegal activity and things like that, where it might change the environment if they knew that you were researching them. But this type of researcher does have certain ethical considerations. Typically, when you research, you let the participants know they're being observed, so that way they have full disclosure, they sign up, they agree to participate. So this type of researcher is a little controversial and only should be used when you really think that revealing yourself would change the way they interact with each other in the research. The second way is as a complete observer. It's the exact opposite of the complete participant, where you're there to only observe and not act like part of the subject in whatever they're doing. So just like in a teaching role, if early on in teaching you sat in the back of the class and you just watched what happened, you didn't interact with the students, you didn't teach or anything like that, you were just simply watching. And this is really good for a large subject like a mall or a store or a school or a stadium, sports event, anything where you as the researcher can just kind of hide in the corner, sit with your notebook and just write down what happens. It's a good way to remain anonymous. And then the third way is probably one of the most common besides the complete observer, is the participating observer. It's just like a combination of the two. You work within the group and they know you're observing. So you are participating with them, maybe going along their day, or, I'm a student in another classroom being a student, but they know I'm taking notes, that this is for research. They know that I'm observing. And this is really good if you want to have more personal knowledge and observation. So you get to talk with the people right next to you. You get to participate in what they're doing. You can ask them questions about what they're doing, and they might be more willing to share that with you on a more personal level with this kind of researcher. And so then as the researcher, you collect different types of data. There are primary observations, which are very factual observations, like the time, location, the schedule of the day, what's happening, the sequence of events, what happened in order, etc. And then there are secondary observations, which are things that you didn't necessarily observe, but you talk to others about what they've seen and the typical reaction. Usually these are things from like interview questions where you are writing down statements from others about what you've observed or what they've observed. And then there's a third important one, which is experiential data. These are the feelings and the state of mind of you, the researcher. So how are you feeling while you're observing this culture and this interaction? How did you react when you saw this happen? How did that make you feel? And these are really important just to kind of gain the atmosphere of the environment. It gives us context and insight as to how you feel as like an unbiased observer in this interaction. And then lastly, there is circumstantial and background data, which just looks at like the roles in the society, how it runs, what is the history, like why are this group here, what do they do, what do they represent, kind of a thing. It just provides context to any outside of like researcher or observer like wanting to read your data, so they know kind of how it works, and then they can better understand the type of notes that you took and the conclusions that you drew from your observations. And so then lastly, you analyze the data and report it, kind of like we talked about before. You would want to analyze your data to come to a deeper understanding, potentially about the research problem that you were set out to look at, or maybe something else entirely that you figured out through your observations. You would want to develop themes disclosed in the data. So you would want to, again, make your affinity diagram, organize your data, look at what kind of themes are in there, and interpret why that's important and what that means. And we'll see that in an example here shortly, why you would want to interpret something like that. And then you would want to report your study by creating a cultural portrait of the group, which is just kind of outlining how it operates, what kinds of things are included in the culture, how the day went, or whatever you were doing when you were observing, what things you saw, just basically a whole big summary and analysis of what you looked at whenever you were observing this culture. And so then we'll go ahead and look at an example. This is a study on IKEA shoppers, which IKEA, if you don't know, is a big, giant furniture store that is particularly known for being maze-like and directing customers a certain way throughout the store. And so this case study looked at the layout of IKEA and how that influenced shoppers and kind of how the shoppers interacted throughout the study. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this video here.
Interior designers must be comprehensively equipped to create supportive, responsive environments. From hospitality to workplace and healthcare to retail, the demand for multidisciplinary solutions is formidable. Like William White did in The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, we observed IKEA shoppers and mapped their meanderings. The biggest secret to IKEA's success is its maze-like spatial organization, designed to obscure a path to the exit. Shoppers meander along a 12-foot wide public street, continually distracted by fully accessorized private rooms to the right and the semi-private salon to the left. IKEA's other secret is the shortcut. We were interested in how many people take the shortcuts and why. The shortcut option allows an out for those who feel a loss of control by being confined to the street, like cutting through an alley. In exercising their freedom of choice and the need to break away from the herd, our study revealed that 40% of IKEA shoppers take the shortcuts, because shortcuts give people a sense of autonomy. People need to make their own rules in how to use space, proving that user autonomy is essential to successful interior design. Another observation that intrigued us was shoppers' interaction with the merchandise. Who samples what, how do they sample, and for how long? People tend to go where other people are. The reason for this is the human act of crowding. We observed that strategically placed product augmented by color, lighting, and pricing attracts the first herd member, and then others follow. Retail strategies designed to attract, engage, and ultimately get shoppers to purchase owe their success to consumer psychology. As the environmental psychologist Paco Underhill says, if we went into the stores only when we needed to buy something, and if once there we bought only what we needed, the economy would collapse. IKEA's environment provides shoppers with just the right sense of belonging, freedom, and safety. We also notice that verbal engagement varies with gender. Men engage in conversation 52% more than women, while women, consumed by spatial interaction, are seriously focused on shopping. How important and applicable are the lessons of human behavior? The human-centered approach to design places users' needs first, and good design is ultimately judged by how conducive it is to human experience. Incorporating psychological, behavioral, social, and cultural research methods enables designers to identify strategies by which to create a reciprocal relationship between space and its users.
So you can see how this was an ethnographic research case study. They showed us kind of the historical context and the background information about the layout of IKEA and how that all worked so that we could understand better their observations. And then they took their observations like the shortcuts, noticing the shortcuts, noticing that people went where other people are, the crowding and stuff to like demonstrate and draw conclusions on why IKEA sets up the store that they do and the way they set it up. And then also like why people are behaving the way that they do. There are shortcuts in IKEA so that way people feel like they have control over their shopping, whereas in really IKEA is influencing them to go certain ways. And so this was a really good example of all of the things that we talked about before, and as well as with this example and with any good ethnographic case study or any research study, you can use that study to formulate new research questions and bounce off and study other topics that maybe you discovered during your research.